The night was heavy with rain, and silence wrapped itself around the towering glass mansion like a curse. The lights glowed, but inside the halls there was no warmth, only emptiness. A young man named Adrian reclined in his leather chair staring at a report he did not understand. His father, one of the richest men in the city, had left him to manage a part of the empire. But numbers and charts blurred in front of his eyes. He had every luxury, every comfort, but no sense of direction. He knew deep down that he was failing, yet pride kept him from admitting it. At school he had always been the one with the best car, the most expensive clothes, but never the best grades. He bought his way through papers. He charmed his way through shallow friendships. And at parties he drowned his doubts in alcohol and noise. But in the silence of his father's estate, he was haunted by something worse than failure, the fear that he had no purpose at all. His father's words rang in his head, harsh and cold. "You are nothing without my money, and you will prove me right." One day, every morning, Adrian would pass the janitor in the grand office lobby. The old man wore faded uniforms, carried buckets and mops, and spoke to no one. He had worked there for decades, unnoticed, invisible. Adrian barely looked at him at first. Just a janitor, he thought. Yet what he did not know was that this man carried within him words that could carve destiny like a sculptor with stone. One evening, after another disastrous meeting, Adrian sat in the empty office, staring at the polished floor. His executives whispered behind his back. He knew they mocked his incompetence. He knew he was sinking deeper. The janitor entered silently, pushing his cart. He did not mean to intrude. But Adrian, in his frustration, snapped at him. "Do you mind I am thinking?" The janitor stopped, looked at him with calm eyes, the kind of eyes that carried storms and wisdom, and then he spoke once. Only one sentence, but it would become the crack that split Adrian's life into before and after. He said, "Young man, a palace built on sand collapses, but a man built on truth never falls." The words echoed in the vast, empty office. Adrian froze. His heart thumped. He felt anger, shame, confusion. He wanted to dismiss it, laugh it off. But something in the janitor's voice, something steady and unshaken, burned into his chest. He tried to reply, but no words came. He turned back to his papers, yet the numbers seemed even more meaningless that night. Adrian found himself restless. He went to the gym but could not focus. He drank, but the bitterness of the liquor only reminded him of those words. He tossed in bed until morning. The palace built on sand collapses. A man built on truth never falls. What did it mean? Was it meant for him? Why did it feel heavier than his father's empire? The following days he tried to ignore the janitor, but curiosity began to gnaw at him. He watched him from the corner of his eye as he swept the marble floors, as he polished glass doors with a patience that seemed infinite. Who was this man? Why did one sentence from him feel more alive than all the lectures Adrian had received in elite schools? He began to linger in the lobby, pretending to check his phone, hoping perhaps the man would speak again. But the janitor did not. His silence was deliberate, his presence humble but unshaken. Then came the breaking point. Adrian's father summoned him to a dinner filled with investors. The father's eyes glared like cold knives as Adrian stumbled over his presentation. The investors smiled politely, but everyone knew he was lost. His father humiliated him in front of the table. "You will never be more than a spoiled fool," he said. Adrian left the hall with rage tearing through his veins. He slammed the door of his car and sat trembling. His hands shook not from fear, but from emptiness. He realized he had no one in his life who believed in him, not even himself. That night he returned to the office. The janitor was there alone, quietly mopping. Adrian stormed in, his voice broken. "Why did you say that? What do you mean a palace built on sand collapses? Tell me, Adrian demanded. The janitor looked at him, set the mop aside, and with calm dignity he said, "Because, son, I have watched the rich for years. They think money makes them powerful. But I have seen them crumble when storms came. The ones who stood were not the richest, but the ones who lived with honesty. Integrity is your foundation. Without it, you will collapse no matter how much wealth surrounds you." The word struck Adrian harder than any insult his father had ever given. He felt his chest tighten, his throat burn. Something inside him cracked, and for the first time, he allowed himself to feel small, not weak, but small, like a seed ready to grow. He sat down on the cold office floor and whispered, "I don't even know who I am." The janitor looked at him with a softness that carried both pain and strength. "You are a man who has not yet chosen his ground," he said. "Choose wisely," and thus began a journey that would pull Adrian through the fire of self-discovery. The janitor spoke rarely, but when he did, every word felt like a hammer, forging iron. Over the coming weeks, Adrian started asking questions. He stayed late in the office, not for work, but to speak with the janitor. He asked about life, about failure, about worth. The janitor never lectured, only shared pieces of truth from a life of hardship and resilience. Slowly, Adrian realized that wealth without character was emptier than silence, and slowly he began to change. The next morning, Adrian stared into the mirror. His reflection looked sharp, expensive, perfectly dressed. Yet for the first time, he did not believe the image. The expensive suit felt like a costume. The watch gleaming on his wrist looked more like a shackle. He whispered the janitor's words again. "A palace built on sand collapses, but a man built on truth never falls." He left for the office not with his usual arrogance, but with an ache inside him. The ache of knowing he had lived a lie. His car roared down the avenue, but even the sound of the engine seemed hollow. He thought of his father, and the way he belittled him. He thought of his so-called friends who only laughed when he paid. He thought of the emptiness he drowned in each night. The janitor was already there, quietly sweeping the marble lobby. Adrian hesitated, embarrassed to approach again. He had never asked advice from anyone, especially not a janitor. But his chest was heavy. He walked closer, cleared his throat, and asked softly, "How did you learn all this?" The janitor looked at him, smiled faintly, and said, "Years of sweeping other people's dirt teaches you about life, son. You see what they hide, what they throw away, what they value, and what they destroy." Adrian fell silent, had never considered that the man who cleaned their messes might know more about truth than all the executives upstairs. For the first time, Adrian did not feel above him. He felt below, like a student before a teacher. He whispered, "Can you teach me?" The janitor studied him for a long moment, then nodded slightly. "I can share, but remember, words mean nothing unless you live them." That night, Adrian found himself unable to sleep. He sat by the window of his massive room, staring at the city lights. He thought about choices he had never made, directions he had never taken. His entire life was mapped by his father's expectations. He never asked himself what he wanted because he thought money could answer every question. Now he realized money answered nothing. The following week brought his collapse. He was scheduled to meet investors again. His father pushed him forward, insisting Adrian deliver the speech. But his hands trembled. His voice cracked. He stumbled over numbers and projections. He did not understand. Laughter whispered across the table. His father turned red with shame and rage. Afterward, in the limousine, he spat venom. "You are a disgrace, Adrian. You are proof that wealth breeds weakness. You will never run this empire." Those words sliced deep, but strangely, Adrian felt no anger, only clarity. The empire was never his because he never built it. He realized now that he had been trying to wear a crown that did not belong to him. His father's shadow suffocated him, and he was crumbling under it. That night he drove aimlessly through the city. The rain blurred the windshield. He pulled over in a dim street, sat in silence, and broke down. He pounded the steering wheel, tears stinging his eyes. For years he thought tears were weakness, but at that moment they felt like fire burning away pride. He whispered into the dark, "I don't know who I am." When he returned to the office late at night, the janitor was again there polishing glass. Adrian walked straight to him with broken eyes. "Please, talk to me," he said. "Please tell me what to do." The janitor put away his rag, slowly looked at him and said quietly, "First, you must stop running. You are not failing because you are stupid. You are failing because you are pretending to be someone you are not." Adrian felt those words cut him open. Pretending. Pretending to be strong. Pretending to be confident. Pretending to be worthy. He had lived a lie for years. He fell into a chair and asked, "Then who am I?" The janitor smiled sadly. "That, son, is what you must discover." For weeks after Adrian began to stay longer at the office, not for his father, not for the company, but to hear fragments of the janitor's wisdom. The old man never gave speeches. He spoke in parables, in small truths. Sometimes he simply asked questions. What would you do if money vanished? What would remain of you? If tomorrow you lost your name, who would you be? Adrian struggled with every answer. But slowly he began to think not as an heir, but as a man. He started noticing things. He had ignored the workers who stayed late, the clerks who handled paperwork, the drivers who barely slept. He realized they were the ones who carried the empire quietly, while he floated above in false importance. He began to feel ashamed of the years he wasted. One evening, the janitor told him the truth about himself. "I was not always a janitor. I once owned a small shop. I lost it when I trusted the wrong man. I fell hard. I had a choice to drown in bitterness or to rebuild myself on honesty. I chose the latter, and though I never became rich, I never again lost who I was." Adrian stared at him in awe. The old man had lived with nothing, yet stood taller than anyone Adrian knew. The realization hit him. Money was not power. Character was power. From that day, Adrian began to change. He arrived earlier, spoke to employees, listened instead of commanding. He struggled at first. His old habits clawed at him. Pride whispered, but he forced himself to learn. Not about stocks or projections, but about people. He sat with clerks, asked drivers about their families, walked through the warehouse, and listened to the workers. The executives mocked him. His father grew furious, but Adrian kept going. Something inside him was shifting every time doubt returned. He remembered the janitor's words, "You must choose your ground." He had lived on sand all his life, but now he was searching for rock, and slowly, for the first time in his life, Adrian felt something he had never known before. Not pride, not wealth, not arrogance, but purpose. A small flame burning quietly inside, telling him that perhaps he could be more than just the hollow air. Adrian's transformation had begun, but transformation always awakens resistance. The deeper he leaned toward humility and truth, the more his world seemed to fight back. His father grew sharper, colder, more merciless with every step Adrian took toward becoming his own man. One morning, Adrian walked into the boardroom ready to sit quietly and learn instead of pretending to lead. He wore no arrogance, just a steady gaze. But before he could take his seat, his father's booming voice cut through. "The heir, sit at the end. You haven't earned a place at this table." The room fell silent. All eyes darted between father and son. Adrian felt heat on his face, but for the first time, he did not explode. He simply obeyed quietly. The whispers began around. Him words, like weak, incompetent, unworthy. Yet deep down, Adrian felt a strange calm. He remembered the janitor's voice. A palace on sand collapses. Perhaps he was finally stepping off the sand. That evening he found the janitor wiping the marble floor. His suit shoes clicked on the tile, but he stopped before the old man. "I let him humiliate me," Adrian whispered. "I sat at the end like a child." The janitor looked up with calm eyes and replied, "Son, sometimes sitting at the end teaches you more than sitting at the head. Pride wants the throne. Humility seeks the truth. Which one are you choosing?" Adrian stood frozen. The truth burned inside him. He whispered humility, but the storm was only beginning. 2 weeks later, Adrian discovered betrayal. His closest friend, the one who partied with him, laughed with him, drank with him, was also feeding his father. Lies, whispering in his ear that Adrian was plotting to steal control. Adrian stumbled upon an email proof of manipulation. Rage coursed through his veins. He wanted revenge. He wanted to crush the man. But the janitor's words rang again. Words mean nothing unless you live them. That night, Adrian stormed into the lobby. His fists clenched. He found the janitor leaning on his mop and burst out. "He betrayed me. He sold me to my father for money. What do I do?" The janitor looked at him long and hard, then asked a single question: "What would punishing him prove?" Adrian faltered. His voice cracked. "It would prove I'm not weak." The janitor shook, his head softly. "No, it would only prove that his betrayal controls you. Control is not strength." Self. Mastery is strength comes when you choose who you are, even when they betray you. Those words cut deeper than any sword. Adrian dropped into a chair, shaking. He realized he had always been controlled by others. By his father's approval, by his friends' laughter, by the shadow of expectation. He had never chosen who he was. That night he sat alone in his vast empty apartment. He turned off every light. Silence pressed against him. He stared at his reflection in the black glass of the window. He whispered, "I don't know who I am, but I will find out." And for the first time he felt a spark of fire inside, not his father's fire, not borrowed. Arrogance, his own. The next day he shocked everyone. He walked into the boardroom, not late, not flamboyant, simply present. He sat quietly at the far end again, but this time he listened, truly. Listened. He asked questions of the workers and the accountants, not the executives. He studied not to impress, but to learn. Slowly, his questions began to reveal cracks in the company's foundation, cracks even the executives ignored. People started to notice. One afternoon, a manager pulled him aside. "Sir, you're the only one who asked about the warehouse delays. The executives don't care, but it's costing millions." Adrian felt something shift. He was no longer the fool at the end of the table. He was beginning to see what others refused to see. His father, however, grew darker. Furious that his son was winning loyalty from workers instead of board members. Furious that Adrian was no longer begging for approval, but walking his own path. One night his father cornered him in the office, his voice venomous. "You think sweeping floors with that janitor makes you a man? You're throwing away your legacy." Adrian met his gaze steady for the first time. "Perhaps, father, I'm building my own." That sentence left his father seething, but Adrian felt free. He no longer lived chained to his father's image. He was still broken, still unsure, but for the first time he was walking toward truth. Yet fate had one final test, a betrayal larger than anything before. A scandal rocked the company, deals his father made. In secret came crashing down, workers faced layoffs, investors fled, the empire trembled. Everyone looked at Adrian expecting him to fail, expecting him to crumble like before. But instead, Adrian stood. He looked at the frightened employees, at the weary. workers, and spoke not with arrogance, not with pride, but with clarity. I cannot promise to fix this overnight, but I promise you this, I will not abandon you. We will face this together. The word spread like wildfire through the company. The son once, mocked as weak, now stood taller than all of them. And when he returned to the janitor that evening, trembling from the weight of responsibility, the old man finally smiled wide and said, "Son, you are beginning to stand on rock." The company was shaking under the weight of scandal. The investors were panicking. The workers were whispering, and the news headlines screamed with venom. The empire built by Adrian's father was crumbling, and all eyes shifted toward the heir who had never once proven himself. But Adrian was no longer the same reckless boy who wasted money and drowned in distractions. The betrayal had burned him. The humiliation had stripped him. The silence of nights with the janitor had carved something. Steady inside him, he was beginning to see himself not as an extension of his father, but as a man with a will of his own. The board demanded answers. They sat in a long, dark room filled with shadows, their faces stern and doubtful. His father sat the head fiery eyes locked on his son. Adrian stood not in a polished suit, but in simple clothes. He had no need to dazzle. He needed to tell the truth. He spoke calmly. Our empire is bleeding because it was built on secrecy. We can no longer pretend. We must face the mistakes and rebuild with honesty. His words were met with laughter by some, rage by others, but silence spread when his father slammed his hand on the table. Enough, he thundered. This boy speaks of honesty as though it can feed the hungry or pay the debts. He knows nothing. Adrian took the blow but did not fall. Instead, he said quietly, "Father, for the first time I am speaking not to please you, not to impress them, but because it is true." The room froze. That single sentence struck like thunder. His father's jaw tightened, but he said no more. Later that night, Adrian found himself back in the marble lobby where it all began. The janitor was there, his mop resting beside him, his eyes calm. Adrian collapsed into a chair. His voice trembling, I stood up to him. For the first time, I didn't shake. The janitor nodded slowly. "That is because you no longer stand in his shadow. You are stepping into your own." But Adrian's path was not yet clear. The empire was vast and broken. Decisions had to be made. Workers looked at him with fear in their eyes. Families depended on him. The weight of it crushed his chest. He whispered, "I don't know if I can carry this." The janitor studied him quietly before speaking the words that would shape his fate. Son's strength is not carrying the weight alone. It is choosing who to carry it with. You must decide now who you will walk with. The next morning, Adrian called the workers together. Hundreds gathered in the warehouse where machines hummed, and silence reigned. Adrian stood before them not as a billionaire's son, but as one of them. His voice cracked, but he spoke from the fire in his chest. "I cannot promise there will be no pain. I cannot promise we will not lose more. But I promise. I will not hide. I will not lie. I will not abandon you. We will fight for this together." The workers erupted in applause. A ripple of hope spread where there had only been fear. For the first time, they believed in him not because of his father's power, but because of his truth. But his father was furious. He cornered Adrian in his office, the air thick with rage. "You dare turn my workers against me?" His voice shook with fury. Adrian looked him in the eye, steady and unbroken. "They are not yours to command, father. They are human beings, not pawns, and I will fight for them even if I stand alone." The silence that followed was heavy like thunder before a storm. His father's face twisted with rage and sorrow all at once. He saw his son not as a weak boy anymore, but as a man unyielding. That night, Adrian sought the janitor again. He needed guidance, but the old man did something unexpected. He placed the mop aside, straightened his back, and said quietly, "My son, this is my final lesson. I will not tell you what to do anymore. You must now choose." Alone, Adrian's heart pounded. He realized the truth. The janitor had never been giving him answers. He had only been pointing him toward his own. The power was not in the janitor's words, but in the courage they awakened. The old man turned to leave, but paused, his voice soft as a whisper. "You no longer need me. Speak once more and the world will hear you." Adrian stood alone in the marble lobby, tears in his eyes. For the first time he understood. He was not the boy waiting for approval or the shadow of his father. He was the man who would carve his own path, and tomorrow he would speak. The dawn was pale when Adrian rose from his bed. The city outside his window was hushed, as though it too waited for what was to come. He stood still, staring at the skyline, knowing the moment he walked into that boardroom, everything would change. Forever. He was no longer the son who faltered under his father's shadow. He was the man who had found his voice. The boardroom was already full when he arrived. The air was heavy with perfume, leather, and greed. Journalists filled the hall beyond, the glass, their cameras flashing like sparks of fire. Investors muttered nervously, some whispering his name and others shaking their heads. His father sat at the head of the long oak table, his presence immense and suffocating. Adrian entered not with swagger, but with a quiet gravity that made heads turn. His steps were steady, his eyes clear. His father leaned forward, his voice cutting through the tension. "This is your last chance to step aside. Let the men who understand power fix this before you ruin us further." Adrian looked at him and answered with calm steel, "I will not step aside, father. I will not be silent." The murmur in the room rose like a storm. Cameras clicked, pens scratched. His father slammed his fist against the table. His empire will not be destroyed by the whining of a boy. Adrian straightened and raised his voice, not to match his father's thunder, but to speak truth so sharp it silenced the room. "This empire was not destroyed by me, father. It was poisoned by lies and arrogance. I will not carry that rot forward." The board froze. The workers who had been invited to hear their fate leaned forward, every face turned toward him. Adrian lifted a folder and spread papers across the table. "These are the hidden debts, the corrupt contracts, the blood money. This is the truth we buried for decades. And this is the truth we will now face." His father leapt to his feet, seething. "You dare expose me before the world, you ungrateful child." Adrian did not flinch. He met his father's eyes and said with unwavering conviction, "I am not your shadow anymore. I am not your echo. I am your son and I am free." The words hit like thunder. His father staggered as if struck not by a fist, but by something deeper. He searched his son's face, and for the first time found no weakness, no fear. Only a man reborn. Adrian turned from his father and addressed the board, the workers and the cameras beyond the glass. "We cannot erase the past, but we can build a future with honesty. I will not promise riches. I will not promise glory, but I promise transparency. I promise to fight for every worker and to carry this company with integrity, not lies." The room erupted. Workers clapped, tears in their eyes. Some board members stood conflicted, but others nodded slowly. Seeing the inevitable, investors whispered frantically, calculating the worth of honesty in a world of corruption. But it was his father's silence that filled the room. The man who once commanded every space with his voice now stood, broken. His empire was slipping from his grasp, not into the hands of strangers, but into the hands of his son. The press flooded in. Questions flew, but Adrian did not hide. He answered with clarity. His voice trembled at times, but he did not falter. Every answer was truth, not polished, not rehearsed. The more he spoke, the more the world listened. By evening, the story had spread across every screen. The billionaire's son had defied his father, exposed the corruption, and vowed to rebuild the people. Were divided. Some called him reckless. Others called him brave. But one thing was certain. He was no longer invisible. He was no longer lost. That night, as the city lights flickered, Adrian walked into the marble lobby where his journey began. The janitor. Was their mop in hand as always? Adrian's eyes filled with tears. He whispered, "I spoke, and they heard me." The old man smiled faintly. "You did not need me to tell you what to say. You carried the words all along. My son, I only showed you where to find them." Adrian stepped forward, wanting to thank him, but the janitor shook his head. "Some debts cannot be repaid. All I ask is this. When you see another soul lost in the shadows, do not walk past. Speak once, just once, and you may save them as you were saved." The janitor picked up his mop and disappeared into the corridor, his footsteps echoing softly, leaving Adrian alone. But no longer empty. Adrian stood in the lobby, breathing deep. The boy who had once failed every test had finally passed, the only one that mattered. He had faced truth spoken it, and changed not only his fate, but the fate of all who watched. The janitor had spoken once, and it had changed him forever, and now it was Adrian's turn to carry that truth forward. The story did not end there, but for the first time in his life, Adrian was not afraid of what came next.